The 9 classes of the chosen. Which one are you, and what does the universe expect from you? Have you ever felt like you were born for something greater, as if the universe whispers that a special mission is waiting for you? Across cultures and spiritual traditions, we hear about those who are chosen, individuals with unique gifts, guided by unseen forces to fulfill a divine purpose. In this video, we will explore the 9 classes of the chosen, their missions, and how their actions shape the world around them. You are invited to discover if you carry the traits of one of these extraordinary beings. Prepare yourself for a journey that may transform how you view life. From the dawn of humanity, stories of the chosen have captivated our imagination. In various traditions, they are seen as those who carry sacred missions, connecting the earthly with the divine. Their journeys reflect a universal quest for meaning, serving as essential pieces in a greater plan. But who are they? Could you be among these unique and special individuals? Being chosen is not about perfection or power, but about purpose. These are people guided by unseen forces, facing challenges and pushing boundaries in pursuit of a greater goal. They play roles that shape not only their lives, but also the lives of those they encounter. They are leaders, healers, and visionaries, but above all, they are agents of transformation. Think of the prophets of old, the warriors who fought epic battles, or the spiritual masters who illuminated paths in dark times. Each of them lived aligned with something greater than themselves. Today, these roles still exist, adapted to the demands of the modern world, yet carrying the same essence: to serve a divine purpose. Perhaps, at some point, you have felt a silent call within you, a restlessness that drives you to seek answers beyond what the eyes can see. This could be an indication that there is something special about your journey. The chosen are not defined solely by their gifts, but by the impact they have on the world and how their actions resonate in the hearts of humanity. This video is not just an analysis of the chosen. It is an invitation for you to explore your own essence and discover if something greater is guiding your actions. The signs are always around us, in moments of courage, intuition, or inspiration. But you must pay attention, for these signs often appear subtly, almost imperceptibly. Imagine existence as a vast mosaic, with each chosen individual being an essential piece of this cosmic tapestry. Each one carries out a unique mission, contributing to the spiritual and collective evolution of humanity. Without one of these pieces, the final image remains incomplete, leaving gaps that affect the whole. The chosen can be healers bringing relief and hope, truth-tellers challenging narratives, or warriors fighting tirelessly for justice and light. Each of them carries within a silent but unbreakable force that drives them to act, even when circumstances seem adverse. If you have ever felt disconnected from the world around you, yet deeply aligned with something greater, it is no coincidence. This feeling is often a reflection of a call seeking to awaken something dormant in your soul. A reminder that you are more than a mere observer. You are an active part of a divine narrative. Being chosen is not about receiving privileges, but about assuming responsibilities. It is about listening to the inner voice that whispers, "You have a greater purpose." This voice does not quiet in the face of challenges, but embraces them as opportunities for growth and learning. It is a journey that demands courage, faith, and surrender. In every generation, the chosen emerge as beacons of light, guiding those lost in the dark. They represent the transformative force needed to overcome crises and build a brighter future. But before they can guide others, they must first recognize and embrace their own mission. Perhaps you have already noticed traces of a chosen one within yourself. Unexplainable intuitions, a fascination with spiritual themes, or a desire to make a difference in the world might indicate that you carry something special. Do not ignore these signs. They are the first step to discovering who you truly are. So, I invite you to embark on this journey of self-discovery. This video is more than an explanation. It is a portal to understanding yourself on a deeper level. Here, we will explore the 9 types of the chosen and help you identify which role you might be destined to fulfill. Are you ready to uncover your mission? Among the chosen, each type carries a unique essence that makes them indispensable in the grand divine plan. Imagine a conductor leading a symphony where every instrument plays a crucial role. This is how the chosen are. Different yet perfectly synchronized in purpose. Each one brings their melody to compose the universal harmony. The first type is the oracle, or seer, one who sees beyond the veil of the present. Like the prophets of old, they are channels of wisdom and premonition. Imagine being able to perceive the waves before they reach the shore, to foresee movements that will shape the future and to guide others with clarity. The oracle is the guardian of vision, connecting the visible to the invisible. Oracles possess what we call the triple C: clairvoyance, clairaudience, and clairsentience. They see, hear, and feel what others cannot. These abilities make them compasses in uncertain times, offering not only answers but pathways. Their presence is like a lighthouse in the storm, guiding those lost in the darkness of doubt. The second type is the free spirit. They are like rivers that flow, uncontrollable and impossible to confine. They embody freedom in its purest form. Many see them as rebels or dreamers, but they carry a vital role. To remind humanity that true freedom is not in escape, but in authenticity. Imagine a bird that knows no cages, soaring wherever the wind takes it. Such is the free spirit. They defy norms, question conventions, and inspire others to seek their own freedom. In a world that values conformity, the free spirit shines like a star, reminding us that to live fully is a divine right. These chosen often face resistance. They are seen as different, sometimes even misunderstood. But it is in this contrast that their strength lies. They do not live only for themselves, they are agents of change, awakening in others the courage to break the invisible chains that bind them. The third type is the truth teller. These individuals are like mirrors, reflecting authenticity in a world full of masks. They cannot hide who they are or lie, even if it places them in difficult situations. To them, truth is not just a virtue, it is a mission. Imagine a flame that burns away all illusions, revealing only what is real. The truth teller challenges deceptive narratives and illuminates paths previously obscured. They are pioneers in times of crisis, reminding humanity that change begins with the courage to be honest. However, the journey of the truth teller is not easy. They often face opposition because truth can be uncomfortable. Even so, they remain steadfast, knowing that authenticity is the foundation of a better world. Like beacons on a dark night, they guide others out of the shadows of falsehood. The fourth type is the inspirational infiltrator. Unlike the others, their approach is subtle, almost imperceptible. They inspire through beauty, art, and influence. Imagine a message hidden in a piece of art or a melody that awakens something profound within you. These chosen understand that not everyone is ready to hear the truth directly. Therefore, they find creative ways to plant seeds of awareness. Often they are artists, musicians, or influencers who blend entertainment with enlightenment, ensuring their message reaches the hearts of millions. Each chosen one has their unique way of impacting the world, whether as an oracle, free spirit, truth teller, or inspirational infiltrator. They all share a common purpose: to elevate humanity. Their missions remind us that even in shadows, there is light. Even in chaos, there is order. What they do resonates through time, leaving marks that transform lives. Every chosen one faces moments of doubt. After all, how can you truly know if you are one of them? The answer does not lie in grand external signs, but in the quiet whispers of the soul. These whispers appear in moments of stillness, when the world slows down and your true essence begins to emerge. Listening to this voice requires courage, as it challenges you to step out of your comfort zone. Think about how many times you felt you had something unique to offer the world, but hesitated out of fear or insecurity. These moments are divine invitations to explore your mission. Like a warrior who must face internal battles before conquering the external world, the chosen must first overcome their own doubts. The fifth type of chosen one, the confused, represents those who feel the weight of a greater purpose but cannot define it. They recognize they belong to something grand, yet they find themselves lost in a world that seems disconnected from their spiritual aspirations. Perhaps you identify with this type, feeling caught between what you know to be true and what is expected of you. Imagine a bird that knows it can fly, but is surrounded by invisible bars. This is the journey of the confused chosen. They see beyond society's illusions, but struggle to integrate this knowledge into their lives. However, it is precisely in this conflict that awakening begins. To overcome the confusion, it is necessary to trust the process. Purpose does not reveal itself all at once. It unfolds gradually, like a book whose pages can only be turned when one is ready. At this moment, the important thing is not to have all the answers, but to keep walking with faith. The sixth type of chosen one, the hermit, is someone who finds strength in solitude. In a world that moves at a relentless pace, the idea of disconnecting may seem challenging, but it is in this space that the greatest revelations occur. By seeking nature, silence, and introspection, the hermit connects to something greater, transcending external noise. Picture a tranquil lake, its surface reflecting the sky while its depths hold unexplored secrets. The hermit embodies this lake, calm on the outside but filled with profound inner wisdom. They remind us that self-discovery is a portal to divine connection. The warrior, the seventh type, represents those who fight to protect the light amidst darkness. They confront challenges many avoid, bearing the responsibility of awakening others. The warrior does not fear confrontation because they know their battle is not just personal, but collective. Imagine a flame that never extinguishes, even in the strongest winds. This is the strength of the warrior. Their courage inspires others to rise and face their own challenges. The warrior understands that every act of bravery echoes beyond themselves, transforming not only their reality, but also the lives of those around them. All these types of chosen ones teach us profound lessons about life. They show us that being chosen is not about being perfect or infallible, but about embracing the journey with authenticity and purpose. Their stories invite us to reflect. Which aspects of our lives align with these roles? Perhaps you are a truth teller, challenging social norms with your honesty. Or maybe you see yourself as a free spirit, breaking patterns and inspiring others to do the same. Regardless of the type, the call is clear. Recognizing your mission and acting upon it is an act of courage and faith. By applying these principles to your life, you'll realize that the path of the chosen is not a destination, but a continuous process of self-discovery and impact. It's about living in alignment with your purpose, regardless of the challenges. And by doing so, you not only transform your own life, but also contribute to a more enlightened world. Throughout this journey, we have explored the 9 types of chosen ones and their missions. Each role is essential, not just for those who fulfill them, but for all of us. After all, the existence of the chosen is living proof that something greater is guiding each of us, connecting our stories to a grander universal plan. The healer, the 8th type, reminds us that caring for the body, mind, and soul is a sacred act. These individuals live to transform lives, teaching that physical and spiritual balance is essential for achieving a fulfilled existence. Imagine waking up every day with energy and clarity, knowing you are living in harmony with your essence. The healer inspires transformation through small acts. They demonstrate that healing isn't just about remedies, but about conscious choices that honor the sacred in every aspect of life. Their mission is a powerful reminder that health is the first step toward spiritual elevation. Finally, the elder, the ninth type, symbolizes wisdom accumulated over the ages. They are the keepers of light, bearers of ancestral knowledge that illuminate our paths. Like ancient trees, elders stand firm while witnessing the world's changes, sharing truths that transcend generations. Imagine sitting at the feet of an elder, listening to stories that not only explain the past, but also provide guidance for the future. Their presence is like a compass, reminding us that even in uncertain times, wisdom is always available. They are bridges between what has been and what is yet to come. All these types of chosen ones share a common purpose: to help humanity awaken to its true potential. They show us that life is not just about surviving, but about contributing, transforming, and illuminating. Each chosen one carries a divine spark that ignites the flame of change. You might still be wondering which of these roles resonates most with your soul. The answer doesn't have to come immediately. Sometimes it's hidden in the small daily decisions, in moments of courage, or in choices made with the heart. Trust the process, for the chosen one's journey is revealed in due time. Recognizing yourself as chosen is an act of acceptance and surrender. It's not about seeking external validation, but about listening to the inner voice that has always known who you truly are. That voice will guide you beyond uncertainties, showing that your existence has a unique and irreplaceable purpose. As you move forward in this discovery, remember that the path may be challenging. There will be moments of doubt, but there will also be light. What matters is not giving up, because every step taken toward your purpose resonates on a larger scale, impacting lives you may never see. Imagine a world where each person recognizes their divine mission and lives in alignment with it. This is the true purpose of the chosen ones, to inspire a collective transformation that elevates humanity to new levels of consciousness, love, and purpose. Today, you have the opportunity to take the first step, whether through silent reflection, an act of courage, or a small decision that resonates with your heart. Every action is meaningful. Do not underestimate the impact of who you are and what you can do. Remember, being chosen is not about standing apart. It's about being a bridge between the divine and the human. Your journey is a gift to the world. Embrace it with courage and gratitude, and watch how your light can illuminate the path for so many others who are still searching. We've reached the end of this journey, but what we've explored here is just the beginning. The world needs people like you, those who dare to seek meaning and purpose in a universe that often feels chaotic. Your search is not in vain. Every step you take towards self-knowledge resonates on a larger scale, bringing light to your life and the lives of many around you. As you reflect on the 9 types of chosen ones, ask yourself, which of these traits resonate with your soul? You may see yourself as a truth teller, a warrior, or perhaps a free spirit. The important thing is not to fit into a label, but to recognize that you have a unique and irreplaceable role in this grand divine plan. Being chosen doesn't mean being exempt from difficulties. On the contrary, it means facing them with courage, knowing that each challenge brings with it a lesson. Your journey is like that of a river, encountering obstacles but never stopping as it flows toward the ocean. That ocean is your greater purpose, waiting to be discovered. Remember that the chosen one's journey is about serving, inspiring, and transforming. It is not a solitary path. It is a shared walk with others who also seek to elevate the world. When you shine, you inspire those around you to find their own light. This is the true power of being chosen. Now take a moment to pause and ask yourself, what can I do today to live more aligned with my purpose? It could be something small, like listening to your intuition, or something bigger, like taking a step toward a dream you've been putting off. Every choice you make with your heart is an act of faith and courage. This video is not just a reflection. It's an invitation. An invitation for you to look within yourself and recognize the unseen forces that guide you. The universe conspires for you to discover your mission. All you need to do is listen, trust, and act. And remember, you are not alone on this journey. Every chosen one faces battles, but they also share victories. There is a community of people like you who believe in a fairer, brighter, and more connected world. By recognizing your mission, you join this wave of transformation. If you resonated with what we've shared here, tell your story. Leave a comment below sharing how you feel connected to one of these types of chosen ones. Your voice can inspire others who are seeking answers. Never underestimate the impact your story can have. Additionally, don't forget to like this video and share it with someone you believe could benefit from this message. Knowledge only has value when it's shared, and together we can reach far more people. Every like, every comment, and every share is a step toward creating a chain of light and inspiration. Subscribe to the channel to continue receiving messages like this. This is a space for reflection, transformation, and self-discovery. Here you will always find support on your spiritual journey. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss future videos, because each message is a piece of the puzzle that can help you discover more about yourself. Before we part, let me leave you with one final thought. You are more powerful than you realize. Within you lies infinite potential, waiting to be discovered and used. Don't be afraid to explore your depths, because it is there that you will find the truth about who you really are. My dear friends, thank you for being with me until now. Remember that your journey is unique and precious. May your light shine brightly, illuminating not only your path, but also the paths of everyone who crosses your life. Until the next video, and may your journey always be guided by divine wisdom.